verse appears in Psalm 22, verse 16. It is the same verse. Let me read this text to you as it would appear in a Jewish Bible. Ki savavuni klovim adas mereim hikifuni. For dogs have surrounded me, a congregation of people who are wicked people, they have enclosed me. Ka'ari yodai v'raglai, like a lion, they're at my hands and my feet. Who is that talking about? It probably is not very striking. You would probably have to know the context. It doesn't. If you knew the context, it would be easy to understand, but if not, you might be confused. I want to do that a second time, as that passage would appear in a Christian Bible, a King James Bible. It would read something along this order. For dogs have enclosed me, a company of evildoers have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. That's what a King James or NIV, a New American Standard, that's how that text will appear. Who does that sound like it's speaking about? Well, any person will immediately go, that sounds exactly like a crucifixion. That sounds exactly like it's speaking about Jesus. Whether you're a Christian or not, you have to go, who? They pierced my hands and my feet. That's very striking. That certainly sounds very Christian. It sounds like a crucifixion. How is it possible that I read to you the passage the first time and we really weren't sure who that was talking about? And read it a second time to you, same verse, Psalm 22, 16 or 17, depending on which kind of Bible you use, and it sounds immediately very, very Christian. Sounds like a crucifixion. The answer to that question is that there's one word that has been mistranslated by the church. The last phrase of Psalm 22, 17 in a Jewish Bible, 16 in a Christian Bible says, Ka'ari yodai v'raglai. The word ka'ari means like a lion. The ka is a prefix which means like. It's a common word in the Hebrew language, biblical and modern Hebrew. It's a very typical name for a Jewish man. During George W. Bush's administration, his press secretary, who's still politically active, his name is Ari Fleischer. Okay? Ari Fleischer, his first name, Ari, means a lion. So Kari means like a lion. Like a lion, they're at my hands and my feet. Now, imagine you take the word like a lion and you use your mouse and select those words in so that these words are now white letters on a blue background in Microsoft Word. You hit the delete key and they disappear. And instead you put in the word they pierced and suddenly you have a brand new message. And that's what the church did. How do you change the word of God? As it turns out, the word Ari appears all over Tanakh. Ari, Aryeh, same root. It means a lion. Throughout Psalm 22, the speaker, who is David, the author of this chapter, is not speaking about anything in the future. He's speaking about his own predicament. It's part of a motif that appears much earlier and continues through. That is that King David felt abandoned, that he felt things were hopeless for him, that his enemies, and King David had many, many enemies. His own son wanted to kill him. His best friend betrayed him. His wife. King David had enemies on all sides. Ultimately, the very next chapter, David is still speaking and saying that ultimately God, the Lord is my shepherd. That God ultimately, even when I'm in the shadow, God is there. He comforts me. His rod, his staff comforts me. Okay? So King David is speaking in the first person about his own desperate predicament. The reason why King David is a person who is so loved, deeply loved, is because David, despite these vicissitudes, which might otherwise spiritually break anyone else, David remained strong, and ultimately he remained faithful to God. And throughout Psalm 22, King David uses a motif of animals, of lions, of dogs, of bulls, and though that poetic motif appears all over the text. In fact, if you go a little further in the same chapter, Hashieni mi pi aryeh, save me from the lion's mouth. Save me from the lion's mouth. Well, when did lions attacking David? What lions is David referring to here? we go a little bit earlier in verse 14. Fatsu olai pihem, they opened their mouth. Aryeh tar v'shoeg. These texts are all speaking about lions that are attacking him, but they don't mean literally lions. It wasn't mean King David found himself in a circus, in a zoo, in the lions' den. Literally, it means his enemies. The church changed one text, one verse, the one word, and suddenly the meaning of the whole chapter changes. Early Christian, no one believed these verses to be about somebody crucified. That is a later invention.
By comparison to the Septuagint. Now, I've given you this crash course in textual criticism because I'm going to reveal something to you that you will find if you have bought into the anti-missionary argument on this. I'm going to reveal something to you that you will find very startling. The Masoretic text stands alone with the reading, they have pierced. I'm sorry, with the reading like a lion, ka'ari. The Masoretic text stands alone with the reading ka'ari. The Septuagint reads, they have pierced. It has a reading that agrees with ka'ari. The Peshitta, the Aramaic version of the Tanakh, has in Aramaic, beza'u. They have pierced. But not only that, there are 6. Is that right? 6? No, sorry, 5. There are 5 manuscripts. In fact, there's a book you can get called Biblia Hebraica, which is a critical edition of the Tanakh, of the so-called Old Testament text. And Biblia Hebraica, if you look up any passage, it'll has all these footnotes that tell you how the variant versions and manuscripts read. And if you look up this passage in Biblia Hebraica, you will see that there are 5 manuscripts dating from the Middle Ages, Hebrew manuscripts, that read Karu. They have pierced here in this passage. 5. But that's not all. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are 2 manuscripts, 2 fragments that contain the text of Psalm 22. This particular verse of Psalm 22. And both of those texts from the 1st century, prior to, both of those texts are from the Dead Sea Scrolls. We know the Dead Sea Scrolls predate the Messiah. Both of those texts have, you guessed it, they have pierced. Ka'aru. Ka'aru. Now, how can we know? Okay, first of all, we've disposed of any dishonesty here. The rabbis didn't change it to Ka'ari. The church didn't change it to Ka'aru. Somewhere along the way, a Yud and a Vav got confused. Very easy to confuse these 2 letters. So let's dispel the rumors that I have seen on both sides. I have seen anti-missionary zealots saying that this text is being intentionally misquoted. I have also seen anti-Semitic Christians, so-called Christians, that use this as an example of how the evil Jews changed the Bible to try and write Jesus out. I want to make absolutely clear here, there is no basis to suppose that there is anything diabolical going on here. But we just want to be open and honest here and work through this and figure out which is the original reading. Is it karu, kari? So point number one is the Masoretic text stands alone with the reading kari, like a lion. All the other texts and manuscripts, all of them have, they have pierced. That would be the Septuagint, the Peshitta, 5 Hebrew manuscripts from the Middle Ages, and 2 fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls. All of the other witnesses say they have pierced. And some of these are witnesses, in fact, all of these are witnesses, well, most of these are witnesses, that predate any possible opportunity for Christian tampering. Okay, now, I also should add here that I have in my hand from the Hebrew Publishing Company an edition of the Tanakh in Hebrew and English, and this is a presumably a lithographic reprint. It says copyright 1916, the Hebrew Publishing Company, New York, printed and bound in the United States of America by Montauk Book Manufacturing Company, Inc. in New York. I have had this since I was a young man. It's in 2 volumes. It was a gift to me by a dear friend of mine who, before I even became a believer in Messiah, who eventually made Aliyah to Israel. So it's actually has a great deal of sentimental value to me. And in this text, in Psalm 22:17, this Jewish translation actually has, they have pierced. Although, admittedly, the Hebrew has, in the Hebrew section, ka'ari, like a lion. How can I know which reading is right? How can I know? I mean, I'm honest, I'm searching, I'm wanting to understand. There's 2 readings here, there's nothing diabolical, it's a yud or a vav, they look almost alike. It's really hard to tell the difference between the 2. Somewhere along the line, somebody made a mistake and a yud became a vav or a vav became a yud. I just want to know which one's right. Now the Masoretic text, yeah, I realize it stands against all the other versions, and that's a huge weight of evidence against the Masoretic text in textual criticism circles. But, I mean, that's a mountain of evidence. But I'm still not convinced. So please, can you tell me, you may ask me, please, Dr. Trimm, can you tell me, how can I know for myself who's right? Now, the solution to this is if you have a Jewish version that has like a lion. You'll notice, for example, I'm looking at the JPS version, which has no italics, but many of them will have italicized words. If you look at a version that has italics, you will see that in order to make the reading like a lion work, they have added in italics the phrase, they are at. Like a lion, they are at my hands and my feet. Now, why do they do that? Well, because it wouldn't make any sense to translate in English, like a lion, my hands and my feet. And besides that, the Hebrew grammar of that phrase would necessitate the translation, my hands and my feet are like a lion. Now, my hands and my feet, how can David be saying my hands and my feet are like a lion? It doesn't make sense. You know, my hands and my feet are, maybe they're like a pizza, you know? I mean, how can my hands and my feet be like a lion? And so, in this context, it's apparent that his hands and his feet aren't like a lion. And so they add the phrase, they are like a lion, they are at my hands and my feet. Now that's the problem, you see, because there is no verb for this sentence in the Masoretic text. If the reading is like a lion, then the verb is missing, because like a lion should be describing something. My hands and my feet are like a lion. Well, like a lion, if my hands and my feet are like a lion, which doesn't even make sense, then what's going on here? My hands and my feet are like a lion? No. Well then, what are my hands and my feet doing? Like a lion isn't a verb. It doesn't fit the sentence. If the reading is karu, then it makes perfect sense. They have pierced my hands and my feet. There's a verb, there's a noun. My hands and my feet, they're being pierced. That's a sentence. That means something. My hands and my feet are like a lion means nothing. And we only dig ourselves into a deeper hole when we start adding words from nowhere into the sentence to make it mean something that it doesn't say anyway. If the text is ka'ari, it still doesn't say, like a lion they are at my hands and my feet. It just says, like a lion, my hands and my feet. The grammar of this sentence absolutely, positively necessitates the reading, they've pierced. So to summarize on this particular reading, all other versions except the Masoretic text, even Hebrew manuscripts from the Middle Ages and Hebrew manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls, have they have pierced. Every one of them. All of them. Plus the Greek text, plus the Aramaic text. All the other versions put together, with the possible exception of the Targums, they have pierced. So the majority reading is they have pierced. The grammatically logical reading is they have pierced. Why should we read like a lion? The only reason I can imagine for reading like a lion is, one, blind devotion to the Masoretic text even where it is clearly textually wrong, or two, desperately not wanting the possibility that this passage could be talking about Messiah, about Yeshua as the Messiah.